I gave them exactly what they wanted. Every dollar. Every asset. Every piece they had been quietly circling for months. And they smiled like they had already won. But when the lawyer reached the final sentence, he stopped reading. That's when I knew they finally understood. If you've ever wondered what happens when people mistake your silence for weakness, stay with me. Because what I did next wasn't loud. Didn't need to be. It was precise. My name is Margaret Hale. I'm 68 years old. And for most of my life I believed that if you gave your family everything, they would protect you in return. I was wrong. My husband, Robert, passed away last winter. 43 years of marriage. And in the end, it was just me standing in a quiet house that suddenly felt too large. Too empty. Too quiet. First they came often. My son Daniel. My daughter-in-law Claire. Even the grandchildren. They brought food. Flowers. Soft voices and careful hugs. They stayed longer than usual. Checked on me. Asked if I needed anything. I thought it was love. Looking back, I realize now it was timing. Grief makes you vulnerable. Slows your thinking. Softens your judgment. And people who are patient know exactly when to step in. Started with small things. Mom, you shouldn't be handling the bills alone. Let me take care of that for you. You don't need to stress about paperwork right now. Claire said those things gently. Always gently. She had a way of making control sound like kindness. And I let her. Because at the time it felt like help. I remember the first document she brought to me. It was just a simple authorization form. Or at least that's how she described it. Just so we can manage things if you ever need support, she said. I didn't read it carefully. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't think I had to. That's the part no one tells you. Trust doesn't disappear all at once. It fades slowly, quietly, until one day you realize it's gone. Weeks passed. Then months. More documents appeared. Small changes. Adjustments. Temporary. That word came up a lot. We're just moving things around temporarily. It's easier this way for now. Once everything settles, we'll put it back. I signed them, one by one, because nothing looked alarming. Nothing felt urgent. And most importantly, nothing was ever explained in a way that made me question it. That was Claire's strength. She didn't push. She guided. And people don't resist guidance the way they resist force. Daniel stayed mostly quiet through all of this. He agreed with her. Nodded at the right moments. Avoided long conversations. I told myself he was just trying to keep peace. But peace and passivity aren't the same thing. I see that now. The first time something felt off wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a big moment. It was a small one. Almost forgettable. Claire had come over one afternoon with a folder. The same cream-colored folder she always used. She placed it on the kitchen table like she owned the space. Like she belonged there more than I did. We should consolidate everything, she said. It'll make things cleaner. Cleaner. Another word that sounds harmless. Until you realize what it removes. I remember asking her one question. Just one. What happens to everything in the long run? She smiled. Not wide. Not fake. Just enough. Well, she said. Eventually it'll all stay in the family. That answer should have meant something. It should have made me stop. But it didn't. Because at that moment, I still believed I was part of that definition. Family. That word changes depending on who's using it. I didn't understand that yet. But I would. Soon enough. The house grew quieter over time. Their visits became shorter. Less frequent. Less necessary. At least that's how it felt. Calls went unanswered. Messages took longer to return. Plans were made without me. And slowly, without anyone saying it directly, I became less involved in my own life. One afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table alone. The same table where I had signed everything. The same place where decisions had been made, without really being discussed. I looked around the room. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. That's when I started to pay attention. Really pay attention. I went through my files. Carefully this time. Line by line. Page by page. And what I found wasn't chaos. It wasn't fraud. In the way people expect. It was something much quieter. Much cleaner. Much harder to argue with. Ownership had shifted. Not all at once. Not obviously, but enough. Enough that if I disappeared tomorrow, everything would already be in place, neatly transferred, perfectly arranged, legally sound. That's the part that almost impressed me. Almost. Because it wasn't reckless. It was patient, structured, planned. Claire hadn't taken anything. Not technically. I had given it, signed it, proved it, every step of the way. And that's what made it so effective. Because when something is handed over willingly, it doesn't look like it was taken. I sat there for a long time that day. Not angry. Not yet. Just aware. Because anger clouds judgment. But awareness sharpens it. And in that moment, I understood something very simple. They weren't waiting for me to question anything. They were waiting for me to stop noticing. That was the plan. Quiet. Clean. Final. But plans only work when no one interrupts them. And that's when I made my decision. Not out loud. Not dramatically. Just clearly. If they wanted everything, I would give it to them. Exactly the way they expected. No resistance. No confrontation. No warning. Because sometimes, the most effective response is agreement. I closed the folder, placed it back where it had been, and for the first time in months, I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I finally understood the game. And once you understand the game, you stop playing by someone else's rules. Once I understood the game, I stopped reacting. I started observing, carefully, quietly, because there's a difference between knowing something is wrong and knowing exactly how it works. And I needed to understand all of it. Not just the parts they showed me, the parts they assumed I wouldn't question. Claire came back a few days later. Same folder. Same calm tone. Same careful choice of words. We're almost done organizing everything, she said, placing the papers neatly in front of me. Just a few final adjustments. Adjustments. That word again. I nodded. Didn't interrupt. Didn't ask questions. Because questions would slow things down. And right now, wanted things to move exactly the way she expected. She slid a document toward me. Just confirming the asset distribution, she explained. Simple. Neutral. Almost routine. I looked at the page. This time, I read it. Every line. Every clause. Every word she assumed I wouldn't notice. And there it was. Clear. Precise. Everything I owned would be divided exactly as they wanted. The house. The savings. The accounts. All structured in a way that left me with just enough to not raise suspicion, but not enough to matter. I didn't react. Didn't pause. Didn't hesitate. Picked up the pen and signed right where she pointed, just like before. Claire smiled. That same small, controlled smile. Satisfied. Not grateful. That difference matters. Because gratitude looks outward. Satisfaction looks inward. She believed the process was complete. Daniel stepped closer, glanced at the papers briefly, then at me. You're doing the right thing, Mom, he said. His voice was soft, careful, as if the words themselves were meant to reassure him more than me. I nodded. I know, I replied, and I meant it, just not in the way he thought. They stayed a little longer that day, long enough to feel comfortable, long enough to believe everything had settled. Claire gathered the documents, placed them back into the folder, held it with the same quiet confidence. We'll have the lawyer finalize everything, she said, just to make it official. Official. That was the part they needed. Not the signatures. Not the agreement. The validation. The moment it became irreversible. Or at least, that's what they believed. After they left, the house felt quiet again. But not empty. Not like before. 'Cause now, there was purpose in the silence. I sat at the table again. Same chair. Same light coming through the window. But everything felt different. Clearer. More defined. I reached for my phone. Scrolled to a number I hadn't used in years. Thomas Reed. Our family attorney. Not the one Claire had been using. Not the one involved in her arrangements. The one Robert trusted. The one who had handled everything for decades. I pressed call. He answered on the second ring. Margaret, he said, surprised. It's been a while. It has, I replied. I need to review something. There was a pause. Short. Professional. Of course, he said. When can you come in? Tomorrow, I said. The next day I sat across from him in his office. The same office Robert and I had visited countless times. Nothing had changed. The shelves. The desk. The quiet, steady presence. That's what I needed. Stability. Clarity. I placed the copies of the documents in front of him. Walk me through this, I said. He adjusted his glasses. Began reading. Slowly. Carefully. Unlike me the first time. Minutes passed. He didn't speak right away. That was the first sign. Because Thomas never rushed conclusions. But he also didn't hesitate without reason. Finally he looked up. Did you sign all of these willingly? He asked. Yes, I said. Another pause. Then he nodded. They're structured to transfer control, he said. Gradually. Cleanly. Legally. I already knew that. But hearing it from him made it real in a different way. Is there anything illegal? I asked. He shook his head. No, of course there wasn't. Claire wasn't careless. She was precise. That's what makes it effective, he added. I leaned back slightly. Let that settle. Then I asked the only question that mattered. Is there a way to give them exactly what they want and still control how it ends? Thomas didn't answer immediately. He looked at me. Really looked. Not at the documents. Not at the situation. At me. Measuring something. Then he said, there's always a way, if you're willing to be patient. Patient. That word again. But this time, it meant something different. Not waiting to be taken from. Waiting to act. I nodded once. That's exactly what I'm planning to do. He closed the folder. Folded his hands on the desk. Then we'll need to restructure everything, he said. Carefully. Quietly. Legally. I smiled slightly. For the first time in a long time. It felt genuine. 'Cause now, I wasn't reacting anymore. I wasn't being guided. I wasn't signing without understanding. I was choosing. Every step. Every word. Every outcome. And if they wanted everything, I was going to give it to them. Exactly the way they asked. Just not the way they expected. We didn't rush anything. That was the first rule. Because rushing creates mistakes. And mistakes create loopholes. Thomas didn't need to explain that. I already understood. For the next few weeks, everything on the surface stayed exactly the same. Claire continued managing what she called the final steps. Daniel stayed quiet, agreeable, present but not involved. And me? I did exactly what they expected. I cooperated. Completely. I answered every call. I signed every paper they brought. I didn't question timelines. I didn't challenge decisions. If anything, I became easier to deal with. That's what made it work. Because people don't prepare for resistance when there isn't any. They relax. They assume the outcome is already secured. Claire stopped explaining things in detail. She didn't need to anymore. Her confidence grew. Subtle, but visible. In the way she spoke. In the way she placed documents in front of me. In the way she stopped waiting for my response before moving forward. That's how control reveals itself. Not in force. In assumption. One afternoon, she sat across from me at the kitchen table again. Same chair. Same folder. But this time there was something different. Finality. We're almost done, she said. Just one last review before the lawyer prepares the official reading. Reading. That was new. She hadn't mentioned that before. I nodded. Kept my tone neutral. Of course. She slid a summary page toward me. Everything listed clearly. Assets. Accounts. Distribution. All aligned with what they had been building toward. I looked at it briefly. Then signed where she indicated. No hesitation. No pause. That was important. Because hesitation creates doubt. And doubt leads to questions. I didn't want questions. Not from her. Not yet. Later that week, I returned to Thomas's office. This time with everything. Copies of every document. Every transfer. Every adjustment Claire had made. He reviewed them again. But this time differently. Not just analyzing what had been done. Planning what would come next. We're not undoing anything, he said. We're redirecting it. That distinction mattered. Undoing creates conflict. Redirecting creates outcome. He explained it carefully. Not complicated. Just precise. We would create a final document. A complete transfer. Exactly as they wanted. No resistance. No limitation. No conditions. At least not on the surface. Because the real structure would be placed where they weren't looking. At the end. In a clause they would expect to be routine. Standard. Unimportant. That's where clarity becomes power. Are you sure you want to proceed this way? Thomas asked. Yes, I said. Without hesitation. Because this wasn't about stopping them anymore. It was about letting them arrive exactly where they thought they wanted to be. That's the difference. If you block someone, they push back. If you guide them forward, they walk into it themselves. The document took time. Careful drafting. Precise language. Every word placed with intention. Nothing emotional. Nothing personal. Just structure. Legal. Clean. Final. When it was ready, Thomas handed me the first copy. I read it slowly. Not like before. Not distracted. Not trusting. Understanding. Every line made sense. Every clause aligned. And at the very end, there it was. One sentence. Simple. Clear. Easy to overlook. Unless you knew exactly what it meant. I looked up at him. This is enough? I asked. He nodded. It's more than enough. I closed the document, placed it back on the desk, and for a moment, I just sat there, because this was the point where everything changed. Not visibly, not emotionally, but structurally. Everything they had been building would still happen, exactly as planned, but the outcome wouldn't be what they expected. I left his office with the final copy, drove home slowly, no rush, no urgency, because the timing was already set. Claire called that evening. We've scheduled the meeting with the lawyer, she said. Everything's ready. Of course it was. That sounds good, I replied. We'll finalize everything then. Her tone was lighter than usual, almost relieved, as if something long in progress was finally reaching its conclusion. In a way, it was, just not hers. The day of the meeting arrived quietly. No tension, no anticipation. At least not from them. We gathered in a small office. Neutral. Professional. The kind of place where decisions become permanent. Claire sat across from me. Daniel beside her. The lawyer at the head of the table. Different from Thomas. This one there's chosen. Prepared. Confident. The documents were placed in front of him. He adjusted them neatly. Cleared his throat. And began reading. Line by line. Steady. Routine. Exactly as expected. Claire sat still. Hands folded. Composed. Daniel listened. Quiet. Uncertain. But present. And me? I listened too. Not to the beginning. Not to the middle. To the end. Because that's where it mattered. That's where everything they believed would meet everything they didn't see coming. And when we finally reached that last page, that last paragraph, that last sentence, I didn't look at Claire. I didn't look at Daniel. I watched the lawyer. Because he was the first one who would understand. And when he did, everything would change. The lawyer didn't rush. He read everything the way professionals do. Carefully. Evenly. Without emotion. That's what made the moment stand out. Because nothing in his tone suggested anything unusual. Not at first. He moved through the document page by page. Listing assets. Confirming transfers. Outlining distribution. Everything aligned exactly the way Claire had planned. Exactly the way she expected. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. I already knew what she was thinking. Relief. Satisfaction. Completion. Daniel sat beside her. Listening. But not following every detail. He never had. That hadn't changed. The lawyer turned another page. Adjusted the stack slightly. Then continued. Full transfer of all listed assets to designated beneficiaries. His voice remained steady. Professional. Routine. Claire shifted slightly in her chair. Not nervous. Just settling in. This was the moment she had been building toward. the confirmation, the finalization, the part where everything becomes official, irreversible, or at least, that's what she believed. The lawyer reached the final page. There was no dramatic pause, no change in posture. He simply moved forward, like he had done with every other document before this one. And then, he read the last section, slowly. Subject to the following condition. That's when it happened. He stopped. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just paused. Midline. A fraction of a second, but long enough for someone trained to read without interruption, to notice something that didn't fit. He looked down again, adjusted his glasses. Read the sentence once more. Silently this time. The room didn't react immediately. Claire didn't move. Daniel didn't speak, because they didn't understand yet. But I did, because I had been waiting for that moment. The lawyer cleared his throat. Not to continue, to reset. Then he looked up. Not at Claire. Not at Daniel. At me. That was the shift. Small, but unmistakable. Mrs. Hale, he said carefully. This clause. Claire leaned forward slightly. What about it? She asked. Her tone still calm. Still controlled. But there was something else now. Something new. The lawyer didn't answer her immediately. He returned his attention to the page. Read the sentence again. Out loud this time. Fully. Clearly. The transfer of all assets is conditional upon the primary beneficiary relinquishing any claim to liquid access for a fixed holding period, during which full authority remains exclusively under the original account holder. Silence. Not confusion. Not yet. Just absence of understanding. Claire frowned slightly. That's standard language, she said quickly. Confident. Almost dismissive. But she was wrong. And the lawyer knew it. He shook his head slowly. No, he said. It isn't. That's when Daniel shifted. Turned toward Claire. Then back to the lawyer. What does that mean? He asked. A simple question. But not one with a simple answer. The lawyer paused. Chose his words carefully. It means, he said, that while ownership is technically transferred, operational control is not. Claire's expression didn't break, but it tightened. Just slightly. That doesn't make sense, she said. It does, the lawyer replied. Calm. Measured. Assets can be reassigned structurally, but access, liquid functional access, can be restricted by conditional clauses. Claire leaned back. Processing. Recalculating. Because this wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't part of her structure. This was something else. Something she hadn't accounted for. Daniel looked at the document again, as if reading it would change something. It didn't. Who holds control? He asked. The lawyer didn't hesitate this time. She does. And he nodded toward me. That was the moment. Not loud. Not explosive. But final. Claire's eyes shifted. From the document, to the lawyer, and then, to me. Really looking this time. Not past me. Not around me. At me. Understanding began to settle. Not fully, but enough. Temporary, she said, quickly, trying to place it back into something familiar. This is just temporary. The lawyer didn't respond, because he didn't need to. The document had already answered that. I leaned back slightly in my chair, hands resting calmly in my lap. No movement, no expression change, because this wasn't the moment to explain, or clarify, or argue. This was the moment to let understanding arrive on its own. Claire looked down again, this time more carefully, more slowly, reading not just the words, but the structure, the implications, the control. And when she reached the end of that sentence again, she stopped, just like the lawyer had. That's when it landed. Not all at once, but enough. Because the realization wasn't about what she had gained. It was about what she didn't have. Control, access, authority. Everything she thought had been secured was still dependent, still structured, still mine. Daniel looked at her, then at me, then back at the lawyer, trying to connect the pieces, trying to understand how something that looked complete wasn't. Can this be changed? He asked. The lawyer shook his head. Not without consent, he said. And that consent. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The room understood. Even if they didn't say it. Claire sat back slowly, the folder still in front of her. The same folder she had carried for months. The same one she believed held everything. No, it didn't. Because what mattered wasn't in her hands. It was in the structure she had overlooked. The part she assumed was routine. The part she didn't question. I watched her carefully. Not with satisfaction. Not with anger. Just clarity. Because this wasn't about taking anything back. It was about showing exactly what had been given. And what hadn't. And for the first time since the meeting began, no one was speaking. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everything that mattered had already been said. In one sentence. Exactly where it needed to be. Claire didn't speak right away. That alone told me everything. Because Claire always had an answer. Always had a way to redirect, reframe, or soften a situation. But not this time. This time she needed to understand what she was looking at. Not emotionally. Structurally. And structure takes time. She picked up the document. Turned to the last page again. Read the sentence slowly. More carefully than before. Not scanning. Not assuming. Actually reading. That was new. Daniel leaned slightly closer. Trying to follow. Trying to catch up to something that had already moved past him. What does that actually mean? He asked again. His voice was quieter now. Less confident. The lawyer didn't rush his response. It means, he said, that while you are listed as beneficiaries, you cannot access, transfer, or liquidate any of the assets without her authorization. He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't need to. The sentence had already made that clear. Claire lowered the document slowly, her fingers still holding the edge of the page. But not firmly. Not the way she had held control before. That's not what we discussed, she said. Her tone wasn't angry. Not yet. It was controlled confusion. The kind that tries to pull things back into alignment. I didn't respond. Because this wasn't a discussion. Not anymore. The lawyer adjusted his position slightly. What you discussed isn't reflected here, he said. This is the finalized structure. Claire turned toward him. Sharper this time. There must be a mistake, she said. Mistake. That word again. The same one she used before. The same one meant to soften intent. To remove responsibility. But this time, it didn't hold. There's no mistake, the lawyer replied. Calm. Direct. Definitive. Daniel looked at Claire. Then back at the document. Then at me. This wasn't what we agreed on, he said. There it was. Agreement. Assumption. Expectation. All built on conversations that were never fully understood. I met his gaze. You agreed to what was written, I said. Not harsh. Not emotional. Just accurate. He didn't answer. Because he knew. Deep down he knew. Claire leaned forward again. More focused now. Less composed. If we're the beneficiaries, then we should have control, she said. That was her logic. Simple. Direct. And incomplete. The lawyer shook his head. That's not how this is structured, he said. Ownership and control are separate in this case. Separate. That was the word she had missed. Or chosen not to see. Claire's posture changed. Not dramatically, but enough. The confidence she had carried into the room was no longer stable. What's the purpose of that? She asked. This time not as a challenge, as a question, a real one. The lawyer didn't answer immediately. He looked at the document again, then said, it ensures continuity of authority. Authority, not ownership. That difference mattered. Because authority decides outcome. Claire sat back slowly, processing, recalculating, looking for a way to reframe what she was hearing. But there wasn't one. Not a clean one. Not a simple one. Daniel exhaled quietly, ran a hand across his face. This means we can't access anything, he asked. Not without her, the lawyer said. And not until the holding period ends. Holding period. Another detail. Another layer. Another part of the structure they hadn't paid attention to. How long? Daniel asked. The lawyer glanced down again. Indefinite, he said. That word landed differently. Heavier. Final. Claire didn't move for a moment. Didn't speak. 'Cause now, the situation was clear. Not emotionally. Legally. And legal clarity doesn't leave room for interpretation. I remained where I was. Calm. Still. Because this wasn't about reacting. This was about allowing the structure to speak for itself. Claire looked at me again. Not with control. Not with calculation. With something else. Something closer to realization. You knew, she said. Not loudly. Not accusing. Just stating. I held her gaze. Yes, I said. No explanation. No elaboration. Because none was needed. Daniel looked between us again. Slower this time. More deliberate. You planned this, he said. Another statement. Another realization. I didn't correct him. I didn't deny it. I simply said, I understood what was happening. That was the truth. And the truth doesn't need decoration. Claire looked back at the document one more time. Then closed it. Carefully. Not abruptly. 'Cause even now, she was controlled. But control was no longer hers. The room felt different. Not tense. Not loud. Just settled. Like something had reached its final shape. The lawyer gathered the pages neatly. Aligned them. Placed them back on the table. Is there anything else you'd like clarified? He asked. No one answered. Because there was nothing unclear anymore. Everything had been said. Everything had been shown. And more importantly, everything had been understood. Claire sat still. Hands resting on the table. No longer directing. No longer guiding. Just present. In a position she hadn't planned for. And Daniel, for the first time, wasn't looking to her for answers. He was looking at the document, trying to understand how something so complete could still leave them with nothing they expected. I looked at both of them, not with satisfaction, not with anger, just clarity, because they had gotten exactly what they wanted. Every asset, every account, every piece, just not the control that made any of it useful. And that was the part they never thought to ask about. No one rushed to leave the room. That was the first thing I noticed. Because usually after documents are signed, people move on quickly. They stand, shake hands, close the moment. But not this time. This time no one knew how to move forward. The lawyer gathered the papers neatly, placed them into a single stack. Professional, composed, as if nothing unusual had happened. But something had. Something structural. Something that couldn't be undone with conversation. Claire was still sitting across from me, hands resting on the table. Not tense. Not shaking. Just still. That was new. Because stillness in someone like her doesn't come from calm. Comes from calculation. Daniel shifted in his seat. Looked at the document again. Then at Claire. Then finally at me. What happens now? He asked. Simple question. But not a simple answer. The lawyer responded before I did. Now the agreement stands as written, he said. Clear. Direct. Neutral. Claire didn't look at him. Her attention stayed on the table. On the space where control used to feel certain. There has to be a way to adjust this, she said. Not loudly. Not urgently. Just searching. The lawyer shook his head slightly. Not without full consent from all parties involved, he replied. And then, he looked at me again. That shift didn't go unnoticed. Not by Claire. Not by Daniel. 'Cause now, authority wasn't assumed anymore. It was visible. Daniel leaned back slightly. Exhaled. Slower this time. Processing. You're saying we own everything but can't do anything with it? He asked. Yes, the lawyer said. That word landed clean. No explanation needed. Claire finally looked up. Her eyes met mine again. But this time there was no distance. No polite detachment. No controlled presentation. Just awareness. You could have told us, she said. There it was. Not anger. Not accusation. Something else. Expectation. As if transparency had been owed. I didn't respond immediately. Because timing matters. Even in conversation. Then I said, you could have asked. Calm. Simple. Accurate. She didn't answer. Because she knew. Asking requires intention, and intention reveals motive. Claire had never asked. Not directly. She had guided, structured, directed, but never asked. Daniel looked between us again. Slower now. More deliberate. Trying to place responsibility. Trying to understand where things shifted. Why would you set it up this way? He asked. This time to me. I met his gaze. Not with emotion. Not with defense. With clarity, I said. He frowned slightly. Didn't understand. Not yet. So I continued. You wanted everything organized, I said. You wanted it structured. You wanted it clean. He nodded slightly. Almost automatically. That's what this is. There was no argument in that. Because it was true. Claire closed her eyes briefly. Just for a second. Then opened them again. That's not the same thing, she said. No, I replied. It isn't. Another pause. The room held it. 'Cause now, they were no longer looking at the outcome. They were looking at the process. And realizing they hadn't controlled it. Not completely. The lawyer stood up slowly. Gathered his materials. If there's nothing further, I'll prepare the final copies, he said. No one stopped him. No one added anything. Because there was nothing left to clarify. Everything had already been revealed. Just not the way they expected. He left the room quietly, closing the door behind him, and with that, the structure of the meeting ended. What remained was something else. Claire leaned back in her chair. Not defeated, but not composed either. Somewhere in between. Daniel stayed seated, hands resting on his knees, looking at the table, at the space where everything had just shifted. Silently, I stood slowly, not abruptly, not dramatically, just moving forward, because the moment had reached its end, and I didn't need to stay in it. Claire noticed. Of course she did. You're leaving, she asked. Her voice was controlled again, but thinner, less certain. I nodded. Yes. No explanation. No justification. Because I didn't owe either. Daniel looked up. Mom, he said. The word felt different now. More grounded. Less automatic. I paused. Not turning fully. Just enough. He hesitated. Then said, we didn't mean. I raised a hand slightly. Not to interrupt. To stop. Because intention doesn't erase outcome. I know what you meant, I said. Calm. Final. And that was enough. Claire didn't speak again. Not because she had nothing to say, but because anything she said now would come after the structure had already settled. And words after structure don't change it. I picked up my bag, turned toward the door, walked out without rushing, because there was no urgency anymore. No reaction needed. No response required. Everything had already been done. Outside the air felt different. Not lighter. Not heavier. Just clear. Because clarity does that. It removes noise. Leaves only what matters. And what mattered now was simple. They had exactly what they asked for. Every asset. Every account. Every piece. Structured. Organized. Complete. Just not in a way they could control. And control was the only thing they had ever really wanted. The drive home was quiet. Not heavy. Not emotional. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after something settles into place. I didn't turn on the radio. Didn't check my phone. Because there was nothing left to confirm. Everything that needed to happen had already happened. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun was lower in the sky. Late afternoon. The same house. The same front steps. But it didn't feel the same. Not like it had before. 'Cause this time, I wasn't returning to something uncertain. I was returning to something defined. I stepped inside. Set my bag down. Walked into the kitchen. Everything was exactly where it had been. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. I poured myself a glass of water. Sat at the table. The same table where I had signed everything. The same place where I had once believed I was being taken care of. Now, I understood something else. Care and control can look identical at first. The phone rang just as I set the glass down. I didn't need to check the screen. I already knew who it was. I let it ring once, twice, then picked it up. Margaret, Claire's voice said. No greeting. No softness. Just my name. I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence sit for a second, then said, yes. There was a pause on her end. Not long, but enough to shift the tone. That structure, she said, wasn't what we agreed on. There it was again. Agreement. Expectation. Assumption. I leaned back slightly in my chair. It was exactly what was written, I said. Calm. Clear. She exhaled. Not sharply. Just controlled. You knew what we meant, she replied. That was the part she still held on to. Meaning. Intention. As if those things could override structure. I knew what you wanted, I said. Another pause. Longer this time. 'Cause now, we weren't talking about documents anymore. We were talking about understanding. And understanding doesn't bend easily. Daniel's voice came through faintly in the background. Asking something. Claire didn't answer him right away. You could have told us, she said again. This time quieter. Less certain. I looked out the window. Watched the light shift across the yard. I didn't need to, I said. She didn't respond. Because that answer doesn't invite conversation. Closes it. After a moment she tried again. We need to fix this, she said. Not command. Not request. Need. I almost smiled. Not because it was amusing. Because it was clear. There's nothing broken, I replied. That was the truth. From a legal standpoint. From a structural standpoint. From every standpoint that actually mattered. That's not true, she said. More firmly now. This doesn't give us access. Access. There it was. Not ownership. Not fairness. Access. The part that makes ownership useful. I know, I said. Simple. Direct. And that's when the conversation shifted. Because she realized. I wasn't misunderstanding anything. I wasn't confused. I wasn't unaware. I was choosing. You did this on purpose, she said. Not a question. A conclusion. Yes, I said. No hesitation. No explanation. Because explanation would soften it. And there was no need to soften anything. The silence that followed was different. Heavier. Not uncertain. Certain. 'Cause now, there was no gap in understanding. Only difference in position. Daniel's voice came through again. Closer this time. What is she saying? He asked. Claire covered the phone slightly. But not enough. I could hear him. That told me something. He wasn't being shielded anymore. He was being included. Too late. She says it's intentional, Claire replied quietly. Daniel didn't speak for a second. Then, put her on speaker. Claire hesitated. Just a moment. Then I heard the shift. The small sound of the phone being repositioned. Mom, Daniel said. His voice clearer now. Present. Not distant. Yes, I replied. Another pause. Then he said, why would you do this? Not angry. Not accusing. Just trying to understand. I leaned forward slightly. Rested my hand on the table. Because you didn't ask for control, I said. You assumed it. Silence. Not confusion. Not this time. Recognition. Slow. Uncomfortable. But real. We thought, he started. I didn't interrupt. But I didn't let him finish either. You thought it would all transfer cleanly, I said. It did. Claire spoke again. Quicker now. But without access it's useless. There it was. Finally. The truth. Not framed. Not softened. Just said. I nodded slightly. Even though they couldn't see it. Yes, I said. Another silence. Longer. 'Cause now, there was nothing left to clarify. Nothing left to reinterpret. Only consequence. Daniel exhaled slowly. What do we do now? He asked. That question mattered. Because it acknowledged something important. They weren't in control. Not anymore. That depends, I said. On purpose. 'Cause now, the structure had shifted. Not just legally. Personally. Relationally. Everything they had built. Now required something they hadn't planned for. Permission. And permission changes everything. No one spoke after that. Not right away. Because the question Daniel asked didn't have a simple answer. What do we do now? It sounded practical, reasonable, but underneath it was something else. Dependence. I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence sit, because silence changes how people hear themselves. And right now, they needed to hear exactly where they stood. Claire spoke first. Of course she did. She always filled the space when it became uncomfortable. We need to restructure the access, she said. Her tone had changed again. Less control. More direction. But not authority. Not anymore. That's not necessary, I replied. Simple. Calm. Final. Another pause. This one sharper. 'Cause now, she was hearing resistance for the first time. Not emotional resistance. Structural resistance. You're not being reasonable, she said. There it was. The shift. From control to pressure. I leaned back slightly in my chair. Still looking out the window. Still calm. I'm being very clear, I said. That difference matters. Because clarity doesn't negotiate. It defines. Daniel stepped in again. More carefully this time. Mom, we're not trying to take anything from you, he said. His voice was softer, measured, trying to bring things back into something familiar, something manageable. I didn't interrupt him. I let him finish. 'Cause sometimes, people need to hear their own words all the way through. We just need access to manage things properly, he added. Manage. Another word. Another layer of control. I turned my attention back to the table, to the quiet space in front of me. You already managed it, I said. Calm. Accurate. Claire didn't wait this time. That's not fair, she said. More direct now. Less filtered. And there it was. Fairness. Not structure. Not legality. Emotion. Expectation. I nodded slightly, even though they couldn't see it. You're right, I said. It's not. The silence that followed was different, because that wasn't an argument. It wasn't defense. It was acknowledgement. And acknowledgement removes the ground people stand on when they want to argue. Claire didn't respond immediately. She recalculated. Again, trying to find another angle, another way back into control. Then what is this? She asked. Her voice lower now. Careful. I took a breath. Not because I needed time. Because the answer mattered. It's structure, I said. That's all. Daniel exhaled slowly. I could hear it through the phone. He wasn't trying to argue anymore. He was trying to understand. But it leaves us with nothing we can actually use, he said. That was the first honest statement. No framing. No positioning. Just truth. Yes, I said. And I left it there. 'Cause truth doesn't need explanation. It just needs to be accepted. Claire spoke again, but differently this time. Not pushing, not directing, asking, what do you want? She said. There it was. The shift. Complete. 'Cause that question changes everything. Not what do we do? Not how do we fix this? What do you want? I didn't answer immediately. Not because I didn't know, but because now, timing mattered more than content. I placed my hand flat on the table, felt the surface beneath my fingers. Solid. Stable. Then I said, I want clarity. Daniel didn't respond. Claire did. That's not specific, she said. I almost smiled. Not because it was amusing, because it was expected. Clarity is always specific, I replied. It just depends on whether you're willing to hear it. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't resistance. It was attention. They were listening now. Really listening. Because they had to. What does that mean? Daniel asked. I leaned forward slightly, just enough to shift my posture. It means, I said, we stopped pretending this was about helping me. No anger. No accusation. Just truth. Neither of them spoke. 'Cause that part couldn't be denied. It means, I continued. We stopped calling control management. Another pause. Longer this time. Heavy, but not chaotic. Just settled. Claire spoke quietly. That's not how we saw it. Of course it wasn't. Perspective rarely aligns with intention. That's how it was structured, I said. And structure doesn't lie. Daniel spoke again. What happens if we don't agree? He asked. A different question. A better one. Because it acknowledged something important. Choice. I leaned back again. Calm. Unmoved. Nothing changes, I said. Simple. Direct. Final. And that was the moment it fully landed. Not the legal part. Not the financial part. The reality. They couldn't move forward. Without me. Not structurally. Not practically. Not at all. Claire exhaled slowly. Not frustration. Not anger. Something else. Adjustment. 'Cause now, she wasn't trying to control the situation anymore. She was trying to survive it. Daniel didn't speak again. He didn't need to. He understood. Finally, the balance had shifted. Completely. And not through force. Not through confrontation. Through design. Through patience. Through understanding the system better than the people who thought they were running it. I picked up my glass of water. Took a small sip. Set it back down. Slowly. Because there was no urgency left. No pressure. No uncertainty. Everything was exactly where it needed to be. They had everything. On paper. In structure. In name. But none of it moved. Without me. And for the first time, they knew it. The conversation didn't end. But it changed. Completely. The urgency was gone. The pressure too. What remained was something quieter. More deliberate. Claire spoke again. But not the way she had before. Not directing. Not correcting. Not controlling. Then what does clarity look like to you? She asked. Carefully. Measured. For the first time. She wasn't trying to lead the conversation. She was following it. That mattered. Because it meant she understood something fundamental. The position had shifted. I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know. But because now, every word mattered. Not in tone. In structure. Daniel didn't interrupt. He stayed silent. Listening. That was new. He had always been present. But not engaged. Now, he was. I want alignment, I said. Simple. But intentional. Claire didn't respond immediately. She was processing. Trying to translate that into something she could work with. Alignment how? She asked. I leaned forward slightly. Not aggressively. Just enough to signal presence. Same understanding, I said. Same expectations. No more assumption. No more interpretation. Just clarity. Daniel spoke quietly. That means we start over? Not exactly. But close enough. No, I said. It means we stop pretending this was ever simple. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was grounded. Claire exhaled slowly. I could hear the shift in her breathing. Not frustration. Adjustment. She was recalibrating. For the first time. Without control. We were trying to make things easier, she said. There it was again. That framing. That narrative. I didn't challenge it. I didn't need to. Easier for who? I asked. Not sharp. Not confrontational. Just precise. She didn't answer. Because that question doesn't leave room for abstraction. It requires ownership. Daniel spoke instead. Probably for us, he said. Quietly. Honest. And that changed something. Because honesty even when late still matters. I nodded slightly. That's a start, I said. Claire didn't interrupt him this time. Didn't redirect. Didn't correct. She let it sit. That was new too. 'Cause now, she wasn't managing perception. She was responding to reality. What do you expect from us now? She asked. Different question. Better question. I took a breath. Slow. Measured. Because this wasn't about demands. It was about structure. I expect acknowledgement, I said. No emotion. No weight added. Just the word. Daniel didn't hesitate. Of what? He asked. I looked down at the table for a moment. Then said. That this wasn't about helping me. Silence. Again. But this time, it didn't stretch. Daniel nodded. Almost immediately. Okay, he said. Just that. No defense. No explanation. And that mattered. Because acknowledgement doesn't need elaboration. Claire didn't nod. Not right away. But she didn't reject it either. She was still calculating, still deciding how much to give, and how much to hold. That hadn't changed. What else? She asked. I looked at the light shifting across the room, then back to the table. To stop calling control management, I said. The same words as before. But now, they landed differently. 'Cause now, they were being heard. Claire exhaled again, longer this time, then said, all right. Not agreement. Not fully, but not resistance either. Another shift. Daniel leaned forward slightly. What happens if we do that? He asked. That question mattered, because it acknowledged consequence. And consequence is where structure lives. I met his gaze. Then we move forward, I said. Simple. Clear. No complication. And if we don't? Claire asked. There it was again. The edge. The test. I didn't hesitate. Nothing changes, I said. Same answer. Same structure. Because consistency is what makes control real. Claire was quiet after that. Not because she didn't have anything to say. Because she understood something now. This wasn't a negotiation in the way she was used to. There was no leverage. No pressure. No angle to shift. Only position. And position had already been defined. Daniel leaned back. Ran his hand across his face again. Slower this time. Processing differently. I didn't realize it had gotten to this point, he said. Not to defend. Not to excuse. Just to state. I nodded. That's the problem with quiet changes, I said. You don't notice them until they're complete. He didn't argue. Didn't push back. Because he couldn't. Claire spoke again. But softer now. What do you want us to do next? She asked. Not what do we fix. Not how do we adjust. What do you want? That shift was final. I let the question sit. Because the answer wasn't urgent. Nothing was urgent anymore. That was the difference. When you control the structure, you control the pace. And I wasn't in a hurry. Because for the first time, everything was exactly where it needed to be. They were listening. They were aware. And most importantly, they were no longer assuming anything. I picked up my glass again, took another small sip, set it down, then said, we continue. That was it. No elaboration. No instruction. Because continuation under new understanding changes everything. Now, they finally understood. We continue. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Because continuation under new understanding isn't the same as before. Claire didn't respond immediately. She let that word settle, tested it, measured what it meant now, compared to what it used to. Daniel spoke first. What does that look like? He asked. Not challenging, not pushing, just trying to follow. That mattered, because for the first time, he wasn't assuming the direction. He was asking for it. I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know, but because I wanted them to sit with the question, to feel the difference between expecting answers and waiting for them. Exactly the same, I said. Claire frowned slightly. That doesn't make sense, she replied. Of course it didn't. Not from her perspective. Because to her, the same meant control, access, authority. To me it meant something else. It makes perfect sense, I said, and I left it there. Daniel leaned forward slightly. You mean the structure stays? He asked. Yes. No hesitation. No adjustment. Because that part was not changing. Claire's expression tightened. Not sharply, but enough. That doesn't solve anything, she said. There it was. Expectation again. Outcome. Utility. I looked at her. Calm. Steady. It solves everything, I said. Another pause. 'Cause now, we weren't talking about access. We were talking about alignment. Daniel exhaled slowly, trying to piece it together. If nothing changes, then what's different? He asked. Better question. I nodded slightly. What's different is understanding, I said. Claire didn't respond, but she didn't dismiss it either. 'Cause now, she was listening. Really listening. Before, I continued. You were moving through a structure you didn't fully understand. Daniel nodded faintly. Not agreement. Recognition. Now you do. Silence. but not empty. Grounded. Because clarity, once it arrives, doesn't leave. Claire spoke again. Quieter now. So we just accept it? She asked. Not resistance. Not fully. But not surrender either. I leaned back slightly, hands resting in my lap. You decide what you accept, I said. That mattered. Because acceptance is not the same as compliance. Daniel looked at Claire. Then back at me. And if we don't? He asked. Same question as before. But now? He understood the answer. Nothing changes, I said. Consistency. That's what makes structure real. Claire closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. More focused this time. More present. Less reactive. Then we need to understand how to work within it, she said. There it was. The shift. Complete. From control to adaptation. I nodded once. That's correct. No praise. No acknowledgement beyond that. Because this wasn't about approval. It was about alignment. Daniel leaned back in his chair. The tension in his posture had changed. Less defensive. More reflective. I should have paid more attention, he said. Not directed at anyone. Just stated. I didn't respond, because that realization was his to hold. Claire didn't interrupt him. That was new. Before, she would have redirected, reframed, protected the structure she had built. Now, she let it stand, unmodified. What does working within it actually mean? She asked. Clear, direct, and finally grounded. I took a breath. Not because I needed time, because the answer needed to land correctly. It means you stop trying to control the outcome, I said. Claire didn't react, but she didn't agree either. She was still processing. It means, I continued, you focus on what you actually need, not what you assumed you would have. That distinction mattered, because assumption had driven everything before. Daniel nodded slowly. That's fair, he said. Claire glanced at him, then back at me. Fair. Control transfers, I said. Simple. Clear. Future. And until then? Daniel asked. I met his gaze. Until then, we work with what exists. No ambiguity. No flexibility. Just structure. Claire leaned back in her chair. The same position she had held earlier, but not the same presence. Before, she was calculating control. Now she was calculating within limits. That's a different kind of thinking. A more grounded one. I understand, she said. And this time, I believed her. Not because she said the words, because of how she said them. No resistance. Processing. They needed time. Not to argue. To adjust. Because what had changed wasn't just legal. It was relational. Structural. In her own way. Recalculating. Not the structure. Her position within it. That takes time. And for someone like her, time is something she's not used to needing. But now, she did. A few days later they came by. Together. That was expected. But something about it felt different. They didn't arrive with a folder. No documents. No papers. Just themselves. That was new. Claire stepped inside first. Looked around briefly. Not scanning. Not assessing. Just observing. Daniel followed. Closed the door behind him. No one spoke immediately. That was fine. Because silence doesn't need to be filled when it's understood. Thank you for seeing us, Claire said. Her tone was controlled, but not calculated. I nodded. Of course. We sat at the table again. Same positions, but not the same roles. Daniel rested his hands on the table. Looked at me directly. We want to move forward, he said. Not cautiously. Not conditionally. Clearly. I nodded once. That's good. Claire spoke next. We understand the structure, she said. Carefully. Measured. We don't agree with all of it, but we understand it. That was enough. Agreement wasn't necessary. Understanding was. That's all that matters, I said. No push. No expectation beyond that. Another pause. Then Daniel said, We'd like to work with you. Not around you. That sentence mattered. Because it acknowledged something fundamental. They weren't trying to bypass the structure anymore. They were stepping into it. Properly. I met his gaze, and for the first time, there was no distance there. Just clarity. That's how it works, I said. Claire nodded slightly. Not fully, but enough. 'Cause now, she wasn't trying to control the outcome. She was learning how to exist within it. And that was the real shift. Not the documents, not the clause, not the control, the understanding. 'Cause once that changes, everything else follows. We didn't go back to how things were. And that was the point. There was no attempt to rebuild something that had already been shown to be incomplete. Instead, we moved forward, slowly, deliberately, within a structure that all of us finally understood. The first few weeks were quiet, not distant, just measured. Daniel called more often, not to ask for anything, just to talk. That hadn't happened in a long time. Not like that. Not without purpose behind it. Claire was different, subtle, but noticeable. She didn't bring documents anymore. Didn't reference management or organization. Those words disappeared. In their place, there was something else. Awareness. Not constant, not perfect, but present. And that was enough. Because change doesn't need to be dramatic to be real. Just needs to be consistent. We met regularly. At the house. At the same table. But the conversations were different now. Not about transferring. Not about restructuring. About decisions. Shared. Clear. Defined. Daniel asked questions. Real ones. Not surface level. Not delayed. Present. Engaged. Claire listened more. Spoke less. And when she did speak, she chose her words carefully. Not to control. To align. That's a different kind of conversation. And it creates a different kind of outcome. Time passed. Weeks became months. And the structure held. Not because it was forced. Because it worked. Because it made sense. Because it was understood. That's the part people miss. You don't need to fight for control. When control is already defined, you just need to decide how to use it. One afternoon we sat together again. Same table. Same light coming through the window. But the atmosphere was lighter. Not because everything had been fixed. Because everything had been clarified. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Relaxed. For the first time in a long time. I didn't think it would work like this, he said. I looked at him. What did you think it would look like? I asked. He smiled slightly. A lot more complicated, he admitted. Claire glanced at him. Then at me. I thought it would be harder, she said. Honest. Direct. I nodded. It would have been, I said, if we hadn't understood it. That was the truth. Not about the documents. Not about the clause. About the shift. The one that mattered. The one that stayed. Claire rested her hands on the table. Not claiming space. Not directing anything. Just present. That sentence, she said. Carefully. The last one. I knew which one she meant. Of course I did. It changed everything, she added. I held her gaze. No, I said. It revealed everything. That's the difference. Nothing had changed in that moment. Not the assets. Not the ownership. Not the structure. Only their understanding of it. An understanding is what gives something meaning. Daniel nodded slowly. I didn't see it, he said. You weren't supposed to, I replied. Simple. Clear. Because the design wasn't meant to be obvious. It was meant to be precise. Claire exhaled quietly. I thought we had everything under control, she said. That word again. Control. But now, it didn't sound the same. I nodded once. You had everything, I said. Just not control. No edge. No emphasis. Just truth. And this time, she accepted it. No resistance. No correction. 'Cause now, she understood the difference. We sat in silence for a moment. Not awkward. Not heavy. Just complete. Because there was nothing left to explain. Nothing left to defend. Nothing left to prove. Everything had already been shown. Not through conflict. Through structure. Through patience. Through one sentence. Placed exactly where it needed to be. Later that evening after they left, I sat alone again. At the same table. The same chair. But not the same person. Because at the beginning of all this, I thought I was losing everything, piece by piece, signature by signature. I thought silence meant weakness, that not reacting meant not seeing. I was wrong. Silence isn't weakness. It's observation. It's timing. It's knowing exactly when something is complete and when it's ready to be understood. I looked at the empty space in front of me. No documents, no folders, no decisions waiting to be made, just stillness. And for the first time in a long time, that stillness felt right, because I hadn't taken anything back. I hadn't reversed anything. I hadn't stopped them. I gave them exactly what they wanted. Every asset, every account, every piece, just like they asked. And in doing that, I showed them something they hadn't considered. Ownership without understanding isn't control. It's dependency. And dependency changes everything. I stood up slowly, walked to the window, looked out at the same quiet yard. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. 'Cause now, there was no confusion, no assumption, no hidden structure waiting to be discovered. Just clarity. And clarity